the record button too. So do that. Going to move fast so I can get through everything, making sure there's time for questions at the end. And certainly I like to make it interactive. We've all been on webinars where it's one-way dialogue or a monologue. That's not what I'm all about today. So there'll certainly be times for ask questions and encourage you to share into the chat so I can learn and everyone can also learn based on your responses. So what we're going to cover off these three strategies or three tips, and then we'll have plenty of time for Q&A at the end, and I'm happy to stay on the line after the formal end to this as well. And obviously our 40-minute slot isn't going to come close to covering everything that I could possibly share around bow ties and maybe all the questions. So at the end, I'll tell you, show you how you can get more help if that's required, to get more information in and around this topic. And at the end, I'll share with you how you can get a copy of the slide pack and this recording as well. Okay, so first question. So if you've been either facilitating bow ties or you've been part of bow tie reviews, or maybe you haven't even been part of bow ties at all, so this might be a bit more of a guess, what are you seeing as some of either the number one issue or pain point or the reason why we're not getting it right? Now, this could be within your current role, within your current organization. It could be a role you had previously, or you just might be looking at industry overall and you might be having an observation. So allocate about a minute and a half now. If you can just jump into chat, just share with us what are you seeing as one of the key issues here about us not getting these bow ties where we all want them to be or where we know they could be. I'll keep an eye on the chat here and see what some people can share. There's no right or wrong. Everyone's perspective is valid, and I actually always learn when people share something in the chat here. So just throw something in the chat, and we can read it out. And someone can be brave and go first. All right, getting the right people in the room and avoiding heuristics, particularly from our profession. Yes. I won't get on my soapbox about that one, 100%. Michael, resource heavy. I'm going to assume you're referring to the actual execution of the bow tie in terms of how many people it's required to do that and potentially the preparation aspects as well. If that's what you're outlining, 100% agree. Wendy, focusing on the right consequence, not specific enough. I feel like we've had that conversation with me in the last few weeks, Wendy. Very nice. What else? Has anyone else got anything else to share there and some of the pain points you're seeing or issues? Who else we got? We got Rashid or Claire or Chris, Carolyn. Chris, I believe a lot of people don't understand the mitigating risk side of the tool if they have only done smaller risk assessments previously. That's a good one, isn't it? Chris, certainly if you're taking a cross-section, so a frontline worker, and they've been used to racks, if we call it that, and then dump them into a bow tie session, potentially there's a knowledge gap there, an education gap there. You've got to somehow close the gap. Carolyn, control and critical control definitions correct and understood. I think you've mentioned that before as well, Carolyn. 100% agree. Same, lack of understanding of the templates and ambiguity. My language isn't working today. Thank you, Sam. Thank you for all those that have added something in. And Wendy, yes, thank you. Feel free to add something in. I'll keep moving forwards, but I'll keep an eye on that chat function. All right, so let's jump into some of these ideas. Now, again, they're not secrets or anything like that, but certainly some areas that I'm seeing, opportunities for improvement. Rashid, defining barrier criticality, human factor. Oh, that's a very interesting one. And certainly from what I see, we really don't do that well, really diving into that side of things. So this first principle here is around being clear on our destination. And what I'm referring to here is our unwanted event, the thing we're bow tying in the first instance. So imagine if you were in LA, Los Angeles. Some of you might have been there, some of you haven't. It's an interesting place. And you wanted to fly to Austria. However, the booking people got the wording wrong and you ended up in Australia. I wonder if that's happened before. How would you feel about that? And in reality, it was only a simple mistake in the wording, yet it had a profound impact on the outcome. So the same thing can happen with the center of the knot of our bow tie analysis. If we get the wording wrong, we can end up with causes, impacts, and the right controls potentially being completely missed. And we can have critical risks of high likelihood also potentially of being realized as well. Let me just click here. And so in these scenarios, when we see these issues, here's some of the pain points or signs and symptoms of where we're potentially not landing with the right center of the knot. And feel free to let me know if there's any of these sound familiar with what you're seeing within your organization. So we can see the center of the knot. Sometimes we've got a failure of a control, for example, failure of emergency response. That's the thing in the middle. Or we might have an impact or a consequence is what's being called out as the center of the knot. We can have critical controls. Yes, they might be critical, but have no relevance whatsoever to the event itself. And we consistently have our investigation, so our post-incident learnings, identifying gaps in our bow ties, sometimes significant gaps. I wonder if any of those sound familiar to anyone. And where we want to be is we want to have absolute clarity. You want to have absolute clarity that the unwanted event is the right unwanted event that's going to be analysed. And we have a good alignment with our broad brush risk assessment, what we said is an unwanted event, thing we don't want to happen, with our bow tie. Today's not talking about broad brush risk assessments, do that in another forum. So some principles here. The description of the unwanted event, so this center of the knot, should describe the point of time at which the system has gone from in control to out of control. That's one of the principles, and it's actually been summarized pretty well by Hassel and Joy. So this particular model here, some of you have seen this before. We've got two zones, if you like. What was that? 3 zones. We've got our normal operating zone where we jump around. Yes, we might have some gaps, but we're still within our safe zone, using that term for this model. Then we might end up in this zone here where we've gone into an unacceptable but recoverable operating zone. So this is, for example, where we have high potential incidents, significant incidents, near misses, grace of God type events that things didn't go pear-shaped. So those things happen. We can still recover and return ourselves into this safe operating zone. And the last, or the evolution of this, is when we go from our unacceptable but recoverable into an unacceptable and unrecoverable zone. And what we're looking to do in the center of our bow ties is we're looking to be able to describe here. So what's our loss of control of the system, which takes us from here to here. So if this thing starts to happen, we can no longer recover. It's only about our mitigating controls. So question now back to the group. And for those that have done this with me, then don't answer. So if we think about the activity is working at heights, who might want to throw in the chat, how could we describe the loss of control event for the activity of working at heights? So we know working at heights, that's not the thing that's going to appear in the center of the knot. What might be some wording we could use in the center of the knot that tells us when the system's gone from in control to out of control? Anyone want to be brave and put something in the chat here? So working at heights, how can we articulate the point of time which has gone from out of control, from in control to out of control? Someone's going to get it. I'm sure you've got it. So we're thinking working at heights, and it's the point in time we've gone from here to here. So Chris, you've gone failure of a crane or other device. Yes. So if I think lifting and craneage, so as soon as we got a failure of a lifted load, yep, absolutely. I was more thinking about working at heights, so someone standing up on something. So you're right, Carolyn. Coal mine worker is falling. Yeah. So the point at time. So if we go backwards, So if this person's working at heights, as soon as they start falling, that's the point at which we've lost control of the system, haven't we? And we're dependent on, what are our mitigating controls there? What about vehicle interactions? So we've got lots of vehicles driving around, might be on the surface, underground, public roads, whatever. What might be some terminology we could use here to describe the point at which we've had a loss of control of system, therefore, in relation to vehicles? Rashid, yep, dropped objects, absolutely. That's another one relation that we have there. Who wants to guess about vehicles or driving? What might be a way we could describe that? The time at which we've gone from out of control. Who wants to be brave? Give 5 more seconds. LV contacts pedestrian. Almost clear. I would question whether that's a consequence as opposed to a loss of control event. Carolyn, loss of control of vehicle. Wendy, uncontrolled movement. Yeah, kind of the same. So this isn't an example. This is a poor example here, just by the way. So thank you for those that are sharing. So here's an example where ideally we want to have loss of control of vehicle in the middle, and we know that can lead to lots of stuff. So if, for example, and we've seen this, we had LV collision here in the middle, then we pretty much have our blinkers on only in relation to collision, don't we? And what I've highlighted, so yes, we might have some these, even though I won't talk about this in this context. We know there's some challenges there with using that as a description. Yes, we might have a damage to vehicle, we might have traffic delay. However, there's other consequence types that if this was named loss of control of vehicle, it's higher likelihood we would recognize these things, because these are things we don't want to happen either, could we? We don't want to have pedestrian strikes, infrastructure damage, other collisions with other types of vehicles, could open edge into a body of liquid. If we were only doing LV collision, unlikely we would pick these up. So that's just an example, one of a few different examples we could use that we really want to get clear on the center of the knot. And it's a loss of control of the system or process. So in the slide pack, I'm not going to go through it. There's some other examples here of good versus poor. So before Christmas, we were working with a client and they asked us to review their critical risk management documentation as part of our advisory service. They had 30 bow ties. And can anyone guess how many? Well, yes, we did find some issues with their unwanted events. Who wants to guess how many we found? So there were 30 bow ties in total. How many do you think we might have found? Just a rough figure out of that 30 issues with. Who wants to have a guess? Choose a number between 1 and 30. Wendy, 30. Oh, gee, you're a bit harsh on them. It wasn't that high. In terms of center of the knot, there were some other challenges, but it was a little bit less. Who wants to go for a number? And maybe there's a hint here in terms of the percentage I've got on the slide. You're almost there, Michael. It was 14. So almost half of their bow tie suite, and these were for pretty significant risks, for their critical risks, had missed the mark on the center of their bow tie. And we just saw there as an example, imagine what they potentially are missing in terms of maybe preventative and mitigating controls, and then forget critical controls when they had that issue. And obviously they've identified that. There's some work for them to do now and fix that up. Not a quick process. So in terms of tactical actions, a key activity in my view or suggestion is have a look at your bow ties, look at the center of the knots. Are they describing the point at which they've lost control? If not, then there's an opportunity to move forwards and fix that up. So starting to round this out, so we talked about the impacts if you don't get it right. We've talked about the process or the rule set for the center of the knot, and an example client that pretty much half of their bow ties were off the mark. So what type of impact might it make to your critical risk management process or your bow tie process if you had absolute certainty on these unwanted events in the center of the knots? And if it would make an impact, now you know what needs to be done to move in that towards that. So rounding this out, define the unwanted event as a loss of control event is a key strategy in getting bow ties right. Chris, I saw your question. I will come back to that later on in the question area. It's a good one. I'll loop back to that. All right, next one. Wrong tool for the job. And we've seen this a lot, and maybe seen this a lot, and maybe a few people online have seen this, where we use bow ties for the wrong times. So what's the analogy here? Using a little bike pump to inflate a truck tire. So think about, you are a professional road cyclist and mountain bike cyclist, and at your next mountain bike race, the Australian Championships, you decide to use your road bike that's got skinny tires and no suspension. What do you think the result might be? Do you think you'd win the race? Unlikely. With your skill set, though, I'm sure you could probably make it work using your skills and experience, but it's unlikely you'd win because you didn't have the tool that was designed for the particular job or for the purpose or for the race that you're lining up for. So the same thing can happen if we use bow tie in the wrong circumstances. Yes, we can use our skills and experience to try and make it work and wedge some things and tweak some things, but it's likely that we're not going to have a stronger product if we use a different tool, or we use the right tool for the right job. And when we start to see some of these issues, or here's some examples of how we can see this occurring. So if there is a lot of uncertainty when you use bow ties and when you don't, there's some risk there. We've seen some modification to bow tie templates to attempt to meet other objectives, and getting more tactically, where we've seen bow ties used for process, to analyze a process, or to assess a complex system. And what we want to do, or where we want to be, is you know when to use bow tie and when you don't, and your organization reflects that. So I'll work through some examples here on what we're talking about, and certainly ask a question if I'm going a bit quick here. So we think about bow ties. We just said about a loss of control event. So they're designed to analyze one loss of control event at a time. So one hazard. Okay, so, and we can see some examples here, listed here are some example hazards where we might use a bow tie. So therefore, they're not designed to analyze a scope with multiple hazards. Because think about it, we've got one center of the knot. It doesn't cater for multiple things in the middle. And some examples here could be a 12-step process or confined space management or things like that, which could be activities requiring a risk review where there could be multiple hazards. And thirdly, they're not designed to analyze failure modes of complex systems. So an example could be a whole electrical protection system or gas monitoring system, or choose another, potentially even your emergency response management system as well. They're more complex, not designed for bow ties. So same idea, just using a specific example. So if we think about our source, one of our hazardous energy sources, I'm going to assume with most workplaces, is electrical energy. In that, we may need to do a risk analysis. We may have an isolation process, let's say our standard 12-step process. Also, we might have in here we've classed a critical risk is contact with live electrical conductors, so getting the center of the knot right. And also, we might say, well, one of our key management systems is our whole electrical protection infrastructure that we've got set up across our place, our business. It could be across multiple places. And we can see here which tools suit which process. So I'm going to assume most of us are familiar with RAC and have used RAC, so Workplace Risk Assessment Control, designed for multiple step activities, can cater for multiple hazards, and can do some ranking and likelihood and consequence, etc. We talked about bow ties are really for loss of control events. The heavy hitters within your organization, there might only be 30 or 40, might be less depending on it. And then over here, if we had to do assessment, understand failure modes of particular management systems or key controls, that's where the ideas of HAZOPs and failure modes, effects analysis, and similar come in. I can't see everyone's faces, but hopefully this is starting to make sense. And I've seen Bowtie tried to be used here and here. And I've also seen rack try to be used here as well. So I really want to get clear on the right time to use the right tool. So tactical, practical activity is if you have bow ties already in your organization, maybe just go and have a look. Have they been used for the right purpose, or have they been used for alternative purposes? If you identify that they've maybe used the wrong tool, then there's an opportunity to move forwards and close that gap. Look to use a right tool. Doesn't mean the process is broken. As we said, you can use skills and experience, but also it's probably not the best, getting you the best return on investment. So we've talked about there are times and places to use bow tie and times not to. And I just went through some criteria that can help you make that determination. So what type of impact, if you're not sure, or if you know straight away that there are some inconsistencies in how the tools have been used, what type of impact might it make to your management of your key risks or critical risks if you had the right tool for the right job? And that's the opportunity moving forwards to go forward and deal with that, because we know that bow tie analysis should only be used for the analysis of single loss of control events. And that's one of the key principles. Okay, third and final principle here is around controlling risks. Are your controls really controls? Now, I know Claire and Wendy, you've certainly been through this one before. So imagine if you are the coach of a soccer team or football team, depending where you're from, and the only instructions you gave your players, so let's say we're on the red team, is you three play up the middle, play up the front, you attack, you three stay in the middle, do some stuff, and you four stay at the back and defend. What will be the result? Would the players know what their specific roles are? And or how would you know if they're doing their role well or not, when all we've just said is that instruction? So the same idea can be applied if we think about controls in a bow tie, in our bow ties that are not specific, measurable, auditable, etc. If we haven't been specific in what we want them to do, how do we know if they're working or not? And when we start to delve into this area and work with organizations, here's some examples of what we see. Certainly these broad statements, some generic statements around controls, and they're pretty much copy and pasted from rack to rack, from risk assessment to risk assessment. There isn't a hard link to the SHMS, so we do this, but we can't verify that we've actually written that down, and we have that in our SHMS. The thing that's described, there's no way that we can actually audit or check that thing because it's so subjective or broad. And yes, we couldn't do any effectiveness assessments on controls as they're not specific. And so where we want to be, what good looks like, not surprisingly, is our controls are specific and our key controls have control effectiveness performed on them. All right, so here's another question to the group. This should be a more easy one. So why do we need to take the time to ensure our controls are specific, measurable, and auditable? Anyone want to throw in their 2 cents, or from their perspective, why it makes sense to put the effort in? This does take some time and resource effort to do this and get this right. Anyone want to guess or tell us why? It's not a trick question. But let's see if someone wants to put something in the chat here. More than one person can answer, by the way. So why do we want to take the time to do this? Do we just do it for the sake of doing it? Michael, how else do you know if they're effective otherwise? Absolutely. I'm going to guess that's Michael M. Coop there. Another Michael. See if they're effective. Absolutely. Feel free, anyone else, to jump in there as well. So what you see here is an example of a fatality report from the Queensland mining industry. Choose your hazardous industry, choose a taxonomy or some type of fatality report. And I'm highly confident that one of the key factors will be talking about controls, and either controls not being in place, controls failing over time, a bit of a blaseness around controls. So we know controls fail or aren't there when we want them to be there. So the more specific we can be, the more we set up ourselves and the frontline people whose potential lives are at risk in being protected. So that's ultimately what it comes down to. And then, yes, once we're specific, then we can do some effectiveness testing, auditing, checking, everything like that. So again, some of you have seen this. Some of you may not. So as an idea here, certainly talked about in Australia, for those that aren't in Australia, is thinking about controls can be three types. It can be either an act, an object, or a system. I'll go through what they are. And one of the key principles is around specific, measurable, auditable, and they have some type of relationship to the thing they're trying to prevent in the first place. So here we go. So how's your organization go at the moment? So here's 5 criteria. Well, let's say 3. So here's the criteria we granulated here, and either this or this. Give your organization a rating out of 10 at the moment for how well they go. 0, no chance, far away, not even on the same planet. 10 is you've nailed it. And somewhere in between is somewhere in between. How would you rate your current organization? Just throw in a number between 0 and 10. This would be an interesting insight too, to see how people's organizations are going. Michael's 5. Paul, you got a 5. Thank you. Okay, so middle of the road. Carolyn 6 or 7 as it stands at the moment. And Coop 7, same. You've got a 5. Okay, who else? Rashid an 8. Wow. Okay, that's good. Chris, you guys are a 5. Anyone else? Who else is on here that wants to throw in? Who else? Wendy, Claire. Bit more challenging when you're across multiple sites, but you might have to make some type of subjective thing. All right, so it looks like that at least those have answered. There's probably opportunities for improvement. Maybe the bulk were somewhere in the middle, a 5 or a 6. So if we granulate down, and again, if you've seen this before, just bear with me. So when we think an act, which is something a human does, I give the analogy, if you can see it with a video camera, which of itself arrests and mitigates an unwanted event. So for those who've seen this question, don't answer it. So if you think about one of the controls we see a lot is isolation procedure as an example. So thinking about the definition I went through of what an act is, would you say that isolation procedure, is that an act type control for the hazard of incorrect isolation? What do you reckon? So either yes or no. Michael's gone no. Chris has gone no. Anyone else have a view? Carolyn's no. All right. I think we're all on the same page there. Paul, you got a no. Thank you. Excellent. We're all on the same page here. So we know that isolation procedure, as the title, it doesn't tell us what the act is, does it? It's just the name of a document. So the level of discipline, and this is where the pre-work comes in, is we would now need to go and look inside the isolation procedure and find, well, what is the specific act which controls this hazard? And this is an example, could be test the system is de-energized prior to commencing work. If that's the act we found, that is what goes in as the control in our bow tie. And we might then link it to the isolation procedure. So we might say, look, test the system is de-energized prior to commencing work as per the requirements of XYZ isolation procedure. So we can show the specific act, and we can show the validation with the SHMS and show that we've got that in there. So we've done that link as well. So an object, complete opposite. There's no human involved whatsoever. It's a physical engineered or design object, which of itself would arrest or mitigate an unwanted event. So thinking about a definition of an object, which of these might be an object type control? What do people think? You can just type in what you think might be an object type control. Chris has gone seatbelts. Carolyn's gone the boom gate. Paul's gone first two. Okay, good, good, good. Anyone else have a variation on it? Except for Wendy and Claire. Seen this before. What do other people think? You go on alarm. So it was a little bit of a trick question. If we think about a object does not have any human component whatsoever, a seatbelt is only as good as the person that wears it, or the person's compliance, if you like, to the times they need to wear it. So seatbelts require a human to do something. And boom gates, so we're going to assume they're North Queensland boom gates, which they come down but don't cover the whole tracks. Yes, they might come down, but also a human needs to stop at the boom gate as opposed to going around it. So out of those three, the only that don't require a human to function is a fire sensor and alarm. We're not talking about evacuations, just alarm doesn't need a person to alarm and do its thing. What the first two are is what the third definition is, which is a system, which is where we've got a combination of an object and a human. Those two go together to pretty much form a system. So which out of those three do you think would be the most effective type of control? If we could choose either an act, object, or a system, which one do you think, if you could choose one, which do you think would be most effective in terms of risk mitigation, either prevention or mitigation? Act, object, or system? What do people think? Object, Carolyn, object, yes. I'm going to guess the third person who's going to jump in will say the same as object. So you're spot on the money. Thank you, Michael. And this is an interesting point, which I talk about in our 2-day masterclass, is think of our standard hierarchy of controls. We had, was it elimination, substitution, then we got engineering. If we went and then looked inside our engineering controls, how many of them might be objects or system? And that's an interesting distinction, which I don't have time here to unpack, but that might be something you might want to do in your spare time. Okay, specific, measurable, audible. We get that. I'm not going to go through that. And another interesting distinction here, which to be fair, I really didn't do a lot in this space, at this level of granulation, only probably in the last 2 years or so, is really getting clear on whether this thing we're coming up with in the Bowtie, the risk assessment, is it actually a control? Because there's some criteria it meets, versus is this thing just a support activity that supports the control being in place, versus this thing being a verification activity. I thought I had an example there. So that's an interesting distinction, which I can't unpack today, don't have time. So we're working with, again, this same client who had the 30 bow ties. And this might be almost a leading question because Barry, Wendy, you cottoned onto this. How many of those 30 bow ties do you think we found issue with controls? When we had that criteria, is an act, object, system, specific, measurable, and audible, is it related to the risk? How many do you think out of the 30 we found issues with their controls? Now I want to throw something in the chat. 20. Good guess, Carolyn. It was actually higher. So Wendy, you were right earlier on. So 30. 30 out of 30. Now it doesn't mean they were all broken. So there were some they gone okay, but there were certainly some lines where we looked at the controls and they were very, very, they were broad, very, very broad. You couldn't audit that whatsoever. We had these parent statements. There's no linkage to the SHMS. It was a bit of a cluster, to be fair. And I guess that's another example of why we're seeing issues with bow ties, because we haven't got specific on our controls yet. So look, rounding out this, certainly we talk about the impacts if we don't articulate and define our controls adequately. We know that can literally result in loss of life. We talked about some criteria to help us get clear on controls. And talked about an example client, 100% of their bow ties had some issues in it. So rounding this out, I mean, one, we know it's a practical thing to go and check your bow ties, or next time you bring them into the review cycle, and then challenge how we've currently been wording bow ties. But we know if we get our controls right, gives us a better chance of success. Okay, so I'll give everyone a minute and a half now. I've gone through a lot of content. I've gone through pretty quick. We've gone through 3 principles. What's one key takeaway for you so far? You know, what's either an aha moment or a key tactical activity or a key learning that you can pick up and go and apply now? We'll spend probably up to 2 minutes here. Just throw something in the chat. I found that this really helps embed some of the information as well by asking this question. It really helps you stop and think and articulate, okay, what is that one thing? It might be more than one thing. So I'll give everyone, a minute. Just throw in the chat. What's one thing that's popped out for you at the moment? Again, there's no right or wrong. Carolyn, confirm that getting the top event point at which you lose control is the do not go past go key. That is excellent. There's probably some type of mem or some type of slide you could put in your bow tie framing presentation that mirrors that. 100%. Get that wrong, everything else is a waste of time, all the way downstream to critical control verifications, which is pretty frustrating. Wendy, I think our controls in the bow tie, because we already have performance standards in place, the controls of the performance actually gives room for potentially missing things, even though you the performance as well. But looking after bow tie on its own, it's not specific enough. Okay, so there's some specificality, say that right, inside the bow tie controls there, Wendy, which then can have some flow-on effects if I read that right. Claire, keep in mind, act object system in the forefront of my mind. Yes, thank you, Claire. Same difference between act and system controls. Yes. Michael, defining loss of control really well. Yes, similar to Carolyn, and building resilience in the act and system controls. Yes. And then we don't have the time here, but then you could start to play around in the critical control selection process in relation to act object system as well. Chris, ensuring all of the identified controls are measurable and selecting the correct statement for the event to ensure everyone understands what they are assessing. Well, we could get on that soapbox and think we've all been in risk assessments where we wander all over the world because we're not clear on that. That's a good one. Anyone else got anything? Paul, you throw anything in there? I think that's everyone else. Rashid, thank you for that. I'll keep an eye on that as we move forward. There's some good takeaways. It's good. So look, we're here because we know there's opportunity for improvement, be it in the tactile or tactical way of moving forwards. What we know, if we don't define our unwanted event well, we can end up in the wrong spot, and we know the ethos of loss of control of system should be applied. We need to use bow ties at the right time and don't use them at the wrong time. That both make sense, right tool for the job. And we just talked about controls. We really want to get granular, be specific, measurable, and audible, linked to a system, ideally focusing on object type controls. So the obvious question, which always pops up, how do I do it? You can do it how I've been doing it for the last 5-10 years. Trial and error, learn some stuff, apply some stuff. We know it takes time. It's a pretty lonely way. Or there's other ways to shortcut that cycle, or learn from people that have done this a bunch of times. And what we do offer, we don't do it all the time, but what we offer at the moment is essentially a gap analysis of the bow tie template of whatever the organization's using. It's pretty much, you send it to us, we do a review, and we give you our thoughts on what are some opportunities for improvement. And certainly it's not for everyone or every organization. If you think your bow tie template's great, you're happy with your process, probably not for you. If you think, hey, maybe we can just have a look, maybe there could be some opportunities for improvement, then that's really who we help out with this particular service. what's in it for us? You've seen our motto. It's all about saving lives. This gives us the ability to help people at scale instead of just the one for one. How it works, pretty simple. You just email us a copy of your template. We do the assessment, and then we just have a chat about it, what we found, and what pretty much fell out of that. And it's, what are the benefits? Well, one, we do the work. There's no cost. Can leverage into our knowledge bank and our library of templates as well. And certainly if we can see any low-hanging fruit that you can get started on straight away to make meaningful change or really help the process, then that's obviously the value add as well that falls out of that. So that's an opportunity there for that. I'm off to Bali with my family soon, so we've only got a 2-week window where I can help you with that one. And then the second one as well is we do have we're going to do it virtually this time. Pretty much we take this idea of what we've just gone into with bow ties and we go a bit deeper. Look, it's only, I think I said 3 hours, but it probably take 3.5 hours. We go through it. We use our template. We go deep end to end through the process. And what it's all about is really upskilling the person or persons who either need to facilitate bow ties in your organization, or could be a risk owner, a control owner, or maybe a risk owner. They just need to upskill themselves. How does this whole work? How does it work? That's pretty much what we do. And out of that, you get the templates and workbook and all the support that we offer and everything like that. So if you're interested in that, then obviously let us know as well. So that's coming up after the Easter holidays. I don't need to worry about this satisfaction guarantee because we back that. Okay, so gone through the content. Just shared about, if you want to take advantage of the review of your template, then admin at Impress Solutions. You can send us an email. Also, if you're interested in the course, then let us know. Now we've got time for questions or comments. And we do have, at least a little bit of time. So if you have a burning question, throw it in the chat function. And then after doing those questions, we'll move to the wrap up. And as I said earlier, I'll stay on the line after the formal end of this if people have other questions as well. So I'll give everyone time to either send us their template or ask a question. And I'm just going to go back up and find your question, Chris, to get things rolling. So if you've got a question, throw it in the chat. And I'll look at Chris's question. Okay. Is it better to have a lot broader with the not statement than not? Now, ironically, we've got 2 nots there. The first not was KNOT, and the second one is NOT. I'll say by design, if we are clear on what the center of the knot needs to describe the point at which we've lost control of the system, if we get that wording right, it must be a broad statement. Well, must isn't the right word. In my experience, it ends up being a broad statement. So for example, if we're talking about vehicles, then having loss of control of vehicle as a center of the knot is a pretty broad statement because there could be multiple different causes of loss of control of vehicle. There could be multiple different consequences and then control suite. Same with working out heights, all of that. So generally, when we take our list of critical risks, let's say our 30, and then go and apply the loss of control of system terminology to it, often results in nice, broad loss of control events that most of our causes and consequences will get captured in. Where it starts to get a little bit, won't say funky, but you just got to be careful is, especially with vehicles as an example. So if you have I think you guys are underground, if you do underground driving versus surface driving versus off-site driving, often in those scenarios, we'll create 3 different bow ties because the control suite sometimes is significantly different. So we might have underground specific vehicle collision controls that aren't relevant on the surface. And vice versa. On the surface, we might have a whole fleet of equipment that we don't use underground or on road. And also when we're off lease on our driving on our public roads,
there might be a whole list of controls there that aren't relevant to surface driving on the lease or underground. So hopefully I'm answering your question. That's sometimes where we might separate it out. Same with fire as an example. Again, depending even with falling from height, sometimes we might split that out to surface and underground, all the different contexts. That was Chris. This was my thinking. Sure, we cover as many bases as possible. Cool. All right. Does anyone else have a question or a comment? You can either throw it in the chat or you can unmute yourself before we go to wrap up. If you've got something on your mind, now's the time to throw it out. Happy to read it or have a crack at doing my best to answer it. I'll give you my 2 cents on it. Keep an eye on the chat. So similar again. So I talked about the admin email. Look, if you want to send us your bow tie, if you want a copy of these slides as well, get and drop an email to admin. I'll try and put it in the chat right now. You can send us an email with all three if you want. If you want to get on the course as well, let us know, and we'll get you all of those materials. So there we go. I've just put the admin email address in the chat there as well. Still seeing no questions, so everyone knows where to find me. I'm always around, wandering over LinkedIn. So thank you. We finished on time or less than time, which is great, which I always like. Trust this has been of help. Thank you for your participation. Thank you for your contribution. I'll now stay on the line and happy to talk through. If someone does have a question, feel free to ask it because other people might have the same question. I'll stay on the line now. If for those that need to go, thanks for coming along. And no doubt I'll speak to you or see you next time around in whatever the next webinar might be. So
thank you. Thanks, Christian.
Who was that?
Thanks, Christian. See you later, mate.
Thanks, buddy. Enjoy.
Thanks, mate. That was great. Thank you.
Awesome. Thanks, Michael.
See you, mate. Bye-bye.
All right. Who's unmuted? Carolyn, do you have... Oh, no, you're out. All right. Thanks, Chris. Thanks, Paul. Unless you guys have a question. Thanks, Wendy.
Thanks, Christian. Catch you, hey.
Yes, mate. See you around the traps.
Yeah, hi Christian, Paul here.
Hello, Paul.
Hey mate, sorry about that. I did another meeting, went over time, mate. Are you going to run this again by any chance?
Sorry, mate. Sorry, what did you say? Am I going to run this webinar again?
Yes.
So I've got it recorded. So
great. Okay, fantastic.
Yeah. So I think I didn't start recording halfway through the preamble, but in terms of the content, I've got that recorded, mate. So
awesome.
You just flick it an email. I'll get lovely our VA to send you the link to the recording once it's all done, and you can watch it at your leisure.
Fantastic. Thanks for that, mate. Apologies again.
All good. It happens.
Thanks, buddy.
Yeah. All right. See you, mate.
Have a good day.
You too.